Hi, everyone. Mike White here. Welcome to this week's vlog post. This week, we're going to take a little bit of a break from our series on generating opportunities at the end of the summer, beginning of the fall. We're going to talk about some economic data that has been, shared, corrected, revised, whatever you want to call it. And, kind of feeds into what I've talked about uh, for months and months and months here about the way the federal government looks at data, the data that they look at, the fact that that data is really old, and takes into play all sorts of considerations and estimates and whatever. That it's really confusing to a lot of us who look at the day-to-day markets and see what people are doing in real time and look at real sales and real jobs and all this other stuff and say, not exactly sure where the government is getting this information from. And then when you look at where the government's getting their information from, you're realizing that the government is tracking information that's 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year, 2 years old to formulate its opinion looking quote unquote forward. And you have to start asking, and I say to myself, and I've said this now for more than 2 years, um, is I don't understand why the government can't get on top of real-time data, looking at what's really happening today in the market. This is 2023, and and to me, it comes back to, do what are we ingrained in, and why do we choose to do it this way, and why is everything such this mystery of whatever, without just simply being able to tell people the truth? And you think to the Jack Nicholson line, truth, you can't handle the truth, right? I don't think that it's us that can't handle the truth. I don't think it's the public or the markets that can't handle the truth. I think it's those in power, the federal government, the Federal Reserve Board members, the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, the Treasury Secretary, the President of the United States, all either looking at data that tries to support a narrative that they think they'd want to share, because they can't possibly be looking at stuff that's real time. And we've said this going back to more than 2 years ago when we first started talking, and we were looking at 2% interest rates. We were looking at no inflation, and we saw some signs that all of this government spending was that they were proposing was going to be a problem. We said, guys, you got to pull some of this stimulus out of the markets. And the Fed just kept right on going, keeping interest rates at zero. And people in government talking about spending trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, and then saying that it's not going to be inflationary to spend twice your normal budget in manufactured money, borrowed money, sucking money out of the economy, or just printing it. And anybody can tell you, and it went into denial as what a recession was. Remember when every business school in the country has a standard definition of a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth, up until we have negative GDP growth for 2 consecutive quarters. And I say, well, now there's this group of people that will sit around, it's a think tank, and they'll tell us a year or two from now whether we had a recession 2 years ago. It's nonsense. So maybe it's they can't handle the truth. Maybe the truth doesn't support their narrative. Maybe the truth doesn't make them whole. Maybe the truth is their problem, not our problem. And I say this because yesterday we got, I don't know what the adjective is, maybe startling, uh, unrealistic, bombastic, whatever you want to call it, news that the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the BLS, which are the ones that give us the jobs reports every month to tell us what's going on in the jobs market, came out with a report yesterday that tracks the actual jobs numbers and revises them. And what did they do? Well, the report covered a period of time from April of 2022 to March of 2023. March of 2023 was almost 6 months ago, just to give you a heads up, right? We're almost 6 months away from that particular number. It tracks numbers that was a year and a half ago up until last year. And they we're looking back and said, based upon what we were telling you the jobs numbers were, and now we go back and kind of audit those numbers out and recount them. Our first revision tells us to tell you that we made a mistake by 300,000 jobs. We were 300,000 jobs off of what we said was really going out there. We made a mistake by 300,000. Now, we're going to review it again next February, and we'll tell you again for a final revision, telling you what's happening. And by the way, a lot of good it does to tell me in February of 2024 what the hell was taking place in April of 2022. Not exactly forward thinking, not exactly what's going on in the day-to-day lives, because this is the same group of people looking at this information that told us that adding trillions of dollars to the economy was not going to be inflationary when, kid on the street could have told you that that can't possibly be the case. You can't fabricate $4 trillion worth of money, put it out into the economy and say it's not going to impact anything, because we all know that that's not the case. We look at this and we say, all right, guys, what's going on? Why do you keep going down this path? We have known for months now in real-time data, that the things the Fed and the Treasury Department has been, and the President of the United States been hanging his hat on, is an absolute fabrication. It's not truthful. Okay, the things that they're touting did not happen, do not happen, is not going to happen. Because we didn't find, after trillions of dollars got spent and we shut down the coal and oil industries in this country with the promise that, well, we got this Green New Deal and we have this Inflation Reduction Act that we're spending all this money on, and all you people that were in coal and all you people that were in oil production and whatever, natural gas, we're going to have all this clean new energy. You're all going to have these jobs, and don't worry about it. It's all going to be great, except for the fact that it didn't happen. You shut down the coal and the oil and the gas industries. You raise the prices of energy in this country, and the technology is not where it needs to be. The funding for electric cars is, people are not buying them. They're too expensive. They don't work. Okay, they're not going to be able to fill the need, not certainly now. We do not have an electrical grid that'll support these things. We already know that it's not true. We saw the disaster, God forbid, what happened to those poor people in Maui, where we've seen an example of what happens when people run a false narrative and don't act in the best interests of people. Why? Because guess what? The fire was caused by the fact that there was a lot of uncleared up brush on the ground underneath the transmission lines. The transmission lines needed to be replaced. And the fact that they didn't replace the transmission lines because they weren't sure whether they were going to go to solar or some other green energy or whatever. So they said, until we figure it out, we're not going to do anything with the power lines. Power lines come down in the high winds. They didn't clear the brush up because it was not, environmentally friendly to clean up the brush. The brush should be left alone. We're not going to spend the money. So then the brush catches on fire, and then the stuff goes on fire, and they won't release the water because they're not sure that we can use water to put out a fire, because it may not be the appropriate use of our saved water. So really, is that what it comes to? Now people die because of these false premises. So it's not whether or not we can handle the truth as a society, it's whether the government wants to handle the truth and actually deal with the realities of the world. And we know this because look how the markets responded yesterday. The jobs report comes out, and immediately we see a 63 basis point improvement on the 5.5% MBS 30-year coupon yesterday by the close of business. 63 basis point improvement in prices. We see a 13 basis point drop in the 10-year Treasury. What makes that even more concerning is the fact that more than 20% of all the 10-year Treasury notes out there in existence in this world are short sold. Do you know what happens when that starts falling? And now those people who went short on those 10-year Treasuries have to go buy 10-year Treasuries to cover their shorts. You know what can happen to those? Yeah, the 10-year treasury could plummet. Absolutely could. And you know what? That'd be, that would drive rates lower, which is what we've been saying all along, is rates should have never been this high. Because A, we shouldn't have raised the lower end of the market this high, that inflation was already coming under control, that we still had 8 rate increases that haven't found its way into the economy yet, slowing down the economy. And the only proof that they had of continually raising rates was the fact that the job market was robust up until yesterday, when we found out they were lying about those numbers. Oh, excuse me. Maybe not lying, maybe they were just incorrect. And now we go into this saying, okay, we're going to get unemployment numbers this morning. I don't know how people are going to react to whatever is said this morning. It'll be interesting to watch. But I know tomorrow, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell is going to speak at Jackson Hole, Wyoming conference. And boy, I pray for all of us that he's man enough to stand there and say, you know what, we're going to have to put the brakes on this raising rate stuff. The data that we're seeing now shows us that we may have been a little overly aggressive in our posture. And the conversation about continually raising rates needs to be tamped down. And we ought to just leave this alone for a little while and get more data that maybe we can trust or figure this stuff out. But certainly we're not going to be raising rates in the near future for sure. I'm not saying we're going to cut rates, but we sure as hell aren't going to be raising rates. And all the people at the Federal Reserve who are shooting their mouths off, especially the dingbat out in California and San Francisco, who's running around saying we got to keep raising rates, we got to keep raising rates, who doesn't even read her own report. A report by her bureau in San Francisco showing a reduction in housing costs and rental costs, the slowing of the housing market. The very thing she's hanging her hat on is the reason that we've got to keep going forward with raising rates. She's the president of the San Francisco Fed. She doesn't read a report that her own office issued. And maybe that explains why banks in her jurisdiction have gone under. So under her supervision, they've had bank failures and a squeeze on the banks in that jurisdiction. Maybe she ought to pay attention to her job, doing what it is she's supposed to do instead of shooting her mouth off, predicting the future that quite clearly she has no idea what she's talking about. Now, I know this sounds a little bit like a rant, because it is. It's a lot of a rant. But I'm ranting at the fact that the markets keep trying to deal with a situation where the people in power seem to be the least informed group of people in this country. And that's a little bit scary. So pray to God that tomorrow, when Jerome Powell makes his speech, at the very minimum, he tones down the rhetoric. He talks about stepping back and taking a look. And maybe, just maybe at the next Fed meeting, he gets all the presidents together and tells them to sit down, shut up, and we'll refigure this out, because we're going to get people in positions here that actually know what they're doing, and we're going to look at real-time data. Because quite frankly, the Treasury Department, the federal government, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, all of them are an embarrassment. The last 2 to 3 years, textbook on how not to handle a pandemic, inflation, the economy, employment, whatever it is. If you want to write the book for future generations on how not to handle something, you can take a look at what's just gone on the last 2 to 3 years. And hopefully the change starts tomorrow in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board says, hey, guys, we're going to slow this whole thing down and we're going to move this thing forward. Again, questions or comments at mike@imtcoaching.com. We'll talk to you again next week with generating more opportunities for your business. Take care.